Okay, since the other movie, it just took forever to get to the scene, the Fantastic Four portion where it is showing a UFO anti-gravity craft with the golden name of Dan right above it. And you should know, if you watched the previous video, that this is what the leader of the Blues of the 44 are working on. And you should have definitely seen the previous video where I show the Gangs of New York clip. And if you had, you would realize that they are saying that they are going to arrive in ships. And that's talking about the arrival of the Locust, as you should know. Now, this is to be teamed with a fake type alien invasion, correct? So we see that the ships are being translated into modern terms of what we would connect, and that would be UFO anti-gravity craft. That is what is under the sheet that you see right there. Now, I am going to play the scene so that it can show it to you as they've presented it in the movie. But I just want to kind of set up a little bit more information here. I'm going to read a scripture. This will be from Genesis chapter 49. This will let you know who they are seeking to apply this biblical input from. Genesis chapter 49, verse 16 through 17. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Now, we know that the interpretation that Israel would see this, that Dan is going to bite the rider, what their intention would be Jesus Christ, in reference in Revelation with Jesus Christ on the white horse. That's what Israel's hoping this means. And that, in a sense, is what the intention conveys up to the point of the observer that understands that Israel is doing this great work to loose Dan. But what we find by the parable word of Jesus Christ is that he says, no, Dan has relegioned, that Dan is an unjust judge, that Dan is no regarder of persons. And as we see, not going to regard Israel. Dan is a multitude, a great army that needs provisions. And Israel somehow has miscalculated greatly, that they are taking and destroying all of the provisions here and taking them to the moon. Where do you think a hungry pack of devouring locusts that need this sustenance, that now believe that they're going to be able to maintain their dominion on this earth, and they're going to stop at nothing to prove that they can do it, because they're no respecter of persons and they don't fear God? And the perspective of these scriptures here, it's not that Dan is working for Jesus in the sense of a whole heart still at this point. I believe that Dan is, in a sense, working for Jesus by the superior wisdom that Jesus has concerning Dan, and that Jesus understands that Dan is no regarder of any person, and that Dan is going to enact his will as the true wild man once he appears, and he will not be controlled, most certainly not by Israel. Because you got to realize, Dan will see itself as Israel, obviously. Now, this is where we come up to this kingdom divided thing that Jesus Christ continually talks about, that goes down through the ethnicities all the way up to the master race that ends up cutting Israel off as an ethnicity in itself. All of that is being conveyed if you understand, if you have been quickened, as I was, as I said, over 2 years now ago, I guess. I know it's hard to understand how I do all this, how I know all this, how I can show all this, but you have to realize the spirit of truth is real. I'm the proof. I'm the proof of that, guys. So please understand, you are seeing something that is blowing the doors off of their deception, blows it right off, and they're seeking not to let it get out. So the few sincere that might even be players on their side, but still are starting to wonder how all this is, and you're starting to maybe have a change of heart, do your part. Get this out. Get this information out. You will be responsible for saving lives rather than destroying them. And I tell you, that means something. It most certainly means something in these coming days ahead. Notice that there's like a Stargate structure, okay, that would be behind the individual here. It's also yellow and golden. The letters that are saying Dan above this craft here are in gold as well. And then notice that it's a blue background, which is showing you who the true, in Israel's eyes, master race, the blues, really are. Exactly right. So the character here, the Human Torch to the left, was just about to peek under the sheet that his leader, the number 44 blue, has been working on. He's been preparing this in secret, and it's all related to Dan. Now, this is where you see that the prophecy is truly fulfilled in the book of Genesis that describes that Dan shall judge his own people. In other words, Israel. And we see that Jesus Christ correctly foretells in multiple parables, even about ass and oxen being led to water on the last day. In Zechariah 11:15 through 17, we'll tell the rest of that tale. Read verse 15 through to 17, as you'll see that we're going to do in an upcoming video. I mean, this is just absolutely monumental, especially if you watch the last video. So I'm going to read you something from Isaiah that is now connected to the fulfillment, or their hoped fulfillment, that people would equate with this, right? This is going to be Isaiah chapter 14, verse 28-29. In the year the king Ahaz died was this burden. Rejoice not thou, whole Palestinia, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Now, what did the start of this video series start as? Roots of the sacred feminine. And I have shown you this hidden history of that deception of the sacred feminine that is being fostered on every imaginable level you can view it. So for out of the serpent's root is the unification of that rabbit and that serpent, as you saw from Sinai to New York City, that represents the fulfillment of Genesis 6. As you see, it's trying to be fostered upon the wrong people using the color stigma of red that would connect to Esau, thereby to justify the judgment against it. So when I entitled this video, Roots of the Sacred Feminine, I really feel that I've given you that information and absolutely the fulfillment of the intent of this code being applied to this scripture. For out of the serpent's root, who would the serpent's root be coming from? What would be coming out of the serpent's root? What's intended? That would be Nephilim. That would be the descendancy. As you see, this propaganda for the Reds. So if this serpent's root is going to produce this Nephilim descendancy and even the cockatrice himself, well, guess what? We've got a red-headed Antichrist coming our way that would fulfill with the arrival of these Dans. But there's more to say on that, how that unfolds. But that will be the cockatrice that they seek to produce. And you got to remember, the devil has always been associated with the color red. How convenient how that's going to fit in for him. And then it says, his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. So what have I always said? I said from the fruit to the root and back again. Once you know the root, you know the fruit. Well, we see that this fruit, which is being described as a fiery, remember the red with the fire, remember them being paired with the fire and all the symbolism from Gangs of New York, the Reds. And his fruit shall be a